Connor, our head of content and also amazing moderator for this panel. Hi, Connor.
Hey, Guy, how's it going over there? Day 2. Very excited about it.
Yeah, it's day 2. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours. And Connor, I'll let you take it from there. Thank you for being here.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a bunch. Yeah, we are very excited to hop in here. It's a little early here across the pond, but never too early to chat about legal regulations for co-living. So here we go. So I'm joined today by 3 housing policy experts. I'm very excited to welcome them to the stage here. We have Jonathan Mills, real estate and prop tech lawyer from Osborne Clarke, joining from London. We have Laetitia Bô, a partner at Urban Act Advocates, as well as Russell Garnett, joining from Australia, the managing director of Urban Revolutions. So just to get started here, I'll just kind of give each of the panelists about a minute or so, or a few minutes to kind of introduce themselves. They'll do a much better job than I will do. So Laetitia, why don't you get us started off?
Yes, thank you, Connor, and thank you to Co-Liv for inviting me to participate in this panel. So I'm a French lawyer, as you can hear, and with my partner, Valentin Gros, we founded a law firm in September, which is called Urban Act Advocates. And our law firm specializes in real estate and in particular in all the prop tech industry. So it's really interesting, and we help French and international co-living companies to structure their activity in France. So we help them choose the best operating model for their projects, and we draft for them their contracts with the owners and the contracts with the co-livers.
Excellent. I appreciate that. Yeah, as you can see, we have folks from a lot of different countries here, so it'll be exciting to kind of get the legal perspectives from France, the UK, Australia, and really all over. All right, next up, in the top right, at least on my screen, we've got Russell.
G'day there, Connor. How are you?
Doing all right.
I think I'd like to start by saying, well, g'day is actually the Aussie way of saying hello and welcome. So welcome to everyone. G'day. Also, thank you. Look, I love helping people, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share with you. Hope we can add some value here in this session. Also, congratulations, I think, has to go out to the entire co-living community, because you've really managed to create this space for people that have such conviction and hope for a better future, and I've really enjoyed being part of it. But look, I'm a 4th generation property developer. I've been in the industry for 26 years. My tertiary qualification is actually in environmental planning and also construction management. So I started Urban Revolutions in 2004. I had the vision to help people to design and build their dreams. I've been honoured to sort of create about 700 beautiful places with awesome customers over about since 2004. But over the last 5 years or so, I had this vision that sort of started to evolve. Really now we're starting to seek to create lifestyle experiences for people and empower people to live happier, healthier, more engaging lives. And hopefully we can do that in a socially responsible and environmentally conscious way. Look, in the next 10 years, our goal is to help about 5,000 people to enhance their lifestyles with us. And hopefully we can do that in a way that is better than they could have ever dreamed possible.
Excellent. Thanks, Russell. Yeah, no, certainly. I think that's a lot of folks in the co-living space share your vision and share your passion as well. Last but not least, we have one of the most famousest co-living lawyers out there. We've got Jonathan Mills.
That's a much kinder introduction than anybody's ever given me, Connor. And I always feel a bit like the third wheel being introduced after Laetitia and Russell, and they do such great things. I'm Jonathan Mills. I'm Associate Director in the Real Estate and Prop Tech team over at Osborne Clarke. And so Osborne Clarke are a full service law firm with offices in the majority of key European cities. I lead the co-living part of our real estate practice that we call Living. And I've worked with co-living operators in both the UK and also US operators as they expand into the European market. And just to echo what Laetitia and Russell have said already, what a great job the Co-Liv team have done putting on this mammoth 2-day event and excluding myself with a wonderful group of speakers as well. And I hope everybody's enjoying it. It's great to sort of have over 100 of you joining us at this time of the morning as well.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, yes, thanks to the three of you for being on here. Certainly looking forward to the fun discussion today. So the next session we're actually going to hop into is, I think Laetitia actually has just a few slides to kind of just to introduce us to the general topic of legal regulations and co-living. So Laetitia, I will turn it over to you to kind of do the quick slides, and then we will hop into the to the questions part of the panel.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share with you a very short presentation, so don't worry. I'm going to share my screen right now.
Excellent. We'll see if we can get, oh, there we go.
All right, is it good?
Yes, we can see it. Go for it.
Okay, great. So thank you for the introduction, Connor. So as I mentioned earlier, we advise a lot of different co-living companies, French and international, that want to implement their activity in France. And we also always have the same questions that comes. And those questions are, does a co-living facility have to be operated in a residential or a commercial building? Are the rent and services subject to VAT? Which legal model of exploitation to choose between the management agreement model and the commercial lease model? And which contract should be concluded with the co-liver? So unfortunately, today we don't have enough time to cover all the topics. But let's focus on one topic, which is very strategic, I think, is the difference between the two models of exploitation, which are the commercial lease model and the management agreement model. So it's very strategic because we're going to see that the commercial lease model, which characteristics are that the owner is not very involved. The degree of involvement of the owner is low. So in this model, the owner rents with a commercial lease to the co-living operating company the premises, and then the co-living operating company concludes with the co-liver a residential lease. In this model, the commercial lease has a lot of advantages. So I'm going to tell you about the pros. So the commercial lease gives a right to the lease. It means that at the end of the lease, at the departure, the owner has to give a compensation to the co-living operating company if he doesn't want to renew the lease. So there is a value attached to the right of the lease, which is very important because it gives values to the business of the co-living company. The problem is that in this model, the operating company bears all the risks of vacancy, for example. So if there is a place that doesn't work, it's quite hard to withdraw from the engagement. And for example, if we want to make a parallel with the example of WeWork, what they did is that they concluded leases with commercial leases with the owners for a very long period of time and with very high rents. And the thing is, during the COVID, they could not fulfill all the spaces, and they have still to pay the rents, and they are engaged for very long times, at least 10 to 12 years. So this is the first model, and we have the second model that is very different legally, and this difference makes has a lot of consequences. And this model is the management agreement model. The owner has a higher level of involvement, because the owner concludes with the co-living operating company a management agreement, and then the residential lease is concluded on behalf of the owner. So it's quite different from the commercial lease, and that means also that it's a share of the risks in case of vacancy in the premises. The risk of vacancy is shared between the owner and the co-living operating company. And also the co-living company can withdraw more easily in case of a low occupancy rate of the spaces. So in fact, it goes in the two ways. So the disadvantages also are that the owner can terminate the co-living's operation quite easily, and the operating company will not be compensated if the owner terminates the contract. So we see that the two different models are very important and very different legally. So it's very important to choose the right model when you can, because sometimes it's true that the owner don't give you the choice, and you may have also a specific local regulation that don't allow you to choose between the two models, and that will restrict your choice. But it's very important as an operating company to have these questions, to see this question. So thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent, excellent. No, I think that was a very good presentation to kind of kick us off here. I think that, you know, during the good times, you know, when everyone's, you know, doing well, the economy is doing well, probably these issues don't get as much attention. But obviously over the past year, with the kind of global economic downturn caused by COVID, this kind of, you know, master lease or commercial lease and management model has got a lot of attention. So thank you for kind of the spotlight there. So without further ado, we will hop into the question part of the panel, everyone's favorite part. But yeah, so all of the folks on the panel today have the absolute pleasure of being a part of two industries that are notoriously slow to change. If we look at the real estate industry, can be, you know, kind of a slow moving giant beast. And then obviously, you know, kind of government regulation, a lot of times in a lot of countries comes with kind of a lot of red tape, and kind of a lot of, you know, slowly kind of pushing it forward. But all the more reason that why it's one of the most important things facing co-living and really real estate at any kind of innovative like form of real estate. And so I think kind of with that in mind, the first kind of category that we're going to tackle is just kind of looking at the current state of co-living legal regulations, right? So, you know, housing regulations across different countries can obviously vary quite a lot, even from city to city. I know I'm calling in from New York here, and it has some of the craziest housing legal regulations ever that I'm sure Jonathan can let us know about as well. But I think when it comes to new innovative housing solutions such as co-living, it can be extremely important to get it right. And a lot of times these laws were made, you know, decades ago, if not more than a century ago. And so they really don't fit the modern needs of modern city dwellers. And so with that in mind, I think I would just kind of broadly like to hear from each of the panelists. If you could comment on kind of legal regulations that you've seen that have served as roadblocks to co-living, or that have really helped the still nascent industry kind of take off a bit. And I might ask Russell to kind of chime in here first. And I think you actually might have some news to share about some recent co-living regulation in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, well, obviously, look, we'll start with the roadblocks, and I might have some. So I'll start with the bad news, and maybe we might have a little bit of good news.
I think it's a good idea.
I guess Australia, like a lot of countries, you know, we've got a lot of regulation, and they come at multiple levels of government. So we have our federal government that sort of looks after the federal taxation, our banking and prudential laws, and even to some extent some funding incentives that happen as well. At state level, we have our major planning legislation. We also have some state-based taxation as well, and we also look after our Residential Tenancy Act. So, how do we allow people to live in unrelated parties' properties? And then we have the local government, and really they're our consent authorities who are meant to administer the development standards, and they're supposed to represent the local interests, but that's the part that we probably have the biggest challenges in right now. But if I sort of touch on the federal level, the biggest issue in making most property development work is we've got to financially make them stack up, and the biggest issue with that we have tends to be around taxation. And in Australia, we've got this situation where historically we're a country that really loves to buy property, and so we've actually created a taxation system that's really designed around developers building something to sell rather than to rent. And for that reason, what ends up happening is that we have this unbalanced tax regime that really incentivizes that build to sell, and it makes about a 10% difference right from the outset. We have what's called a GST, goods and services tax. I think in other jurisdictions it might be called your VAT or value added taxes. And so we've got this imbalance where in a build to sell product, I can basically claim that tax back and the end user pays it. We're on a rental model, we have to pay it and we don't get it back. So that makes a really big difference. At the state level, we've got a lot of policy stuff going on. So, but the roadblocks there is that we always find that in government, things just happen a lot slower than what property developers want it to be. But we've got this situation where both our state government and our local governments are probably not aligned with where that policy should go. And so, unfortunately, what's happening at the moment is developers are getting stuck, almost needing to work out a way to get through our legal courts to actually get projects that have to do with co-living or a build to rent, having to get through the court system to actually get through. So obviously it delays time and increases cost.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. No, I appreciate that background. Yeah, I think it's kind of always fascinating kind of hearing the different kind of schemes in different countries. And in a lot of ways they're similar, but in a lot of ways they're different. And then Jonathan, I guess would love to kind of hear the kind of update from the UK and kind of what you're seeing over there.
So there's a lot of change coming about in the UK, which we'll touch on in one of the later questions. But sort of the current state of play is there's really a lack of a clear framework in the UK for consenting co-living projects, which has sort of led to a real disparity in approach of different operators and developers and how they get these schemes consented. And so the lack of a clear framework, coupled with a bit of a lack of understanding, I'd say, in the UK and a lot of European cities, actually, a lot of European countries around what co-living is, how it works, what the benefits are, and why it's really got this groundswell of support behind it at the moment. Those two items sort of when joined together, so the lack of a clear framework for the regulators to make decisions, coupled with a bit of a lack of public understanding, tends to lead to, as I said, a real disparate approach in how everybody goes about this. And with people taking different approaches, the confusion builds and the lack of clarity builds as to how we're best as a co-living community to drive regulation forward and to get these developments consented in the right way. Sort of on our pre-call, I said to the guys on the panel, there's a site in Croydon, rather large co-living site consented in the UK, and the local newspaper had reported it as, and they used much worse language, but they'd said that all of the rooms were just rabbit hutches, and that this scheme should never have been consented and was dreadful, and co-living's the scourge of the earth. But then it's fully occupied with a lot of people that are desperate to live there, and they were oversubscribed. And so it just shows there's a real lack of there's no clear connection between public perception and what's happening from a regulation perspective. So the need and the want is there, the regulation hasn't really caught up. So for me, partly it's the fault of policy and regulation makers, but then there's a real responsibility on us as the co-living community to make sure there's a clear understanding of what we're looking to achieve, so that we can allow the decision makers and empower them to bring co-living more into the affordable housing mix. As Russell said, there's got to be some good news somewhere. And so what's actually happened as a result of the confusion and the lack of clarity in the UK, it's actually helped in some instances. So you look at some of the collective's beautiful developments, for example, and they've had the opportunity, because of a lack of structure around how we get co-living consented, they've had an opportunity to take what they feel like is a really good product, really well designed, to take this to planners that will actually, or decision makers that will actually listen and use the product and use the support of the co-living community to convince open-minded decision makers that this should be part of the housing mix in the UK. And so there is an argument that lack of clarity can be exploited at the moment, and that they're actually getting schemes consented in lots of different ways. So for example, the collective scheme at Canary Wharf is actually consented as a hotel. And that's different to a lot of schemes that are sort of consented just purely on the basis of what they are. So they're co-living, so they're shared living. Whereas, yes, there were tax consequences the way the collective did it at Canary Wharf, but it allowed them to get permission. There were, not that it was a loophole, but there was a decision for them to make that they could get the scheme consented in this way. And so the lack of clear boundaries and structure around co-living in the UK does in itself at the moment bring some opportunity to put schemes forward in slightly innovative ways.
Excellent. No, I find that absolutely fascinating, kind of looking at, because there is no kind of, and in a lot of countries, there's no co-living specific or shared housing kind of specific laws. Some of them end up being hospitality. Some of them end up being residential, but it's just kind of, hey, wherever we can fit is where we're going to go in the meantime until we can really understand what's going on, and hopefully regulators can catch up with that. And then, Laetitia, would love to hear what's going on in France. I know that your law firm does a lot to kind of help co-living operators that might be expanding into France understand the legal regulations there. So would love to see if there's any roadblocks or kind of good laws that have kind of caught up with co-living already.
Yes, in France also it's a bit complicated because there is no specific regulation on co-living, obviously, and if we have to wait, we are going to wait a while before having some regulations. So we need to take what exists already, and so we use the co-housing. There is a co-housing law. But the difficulty in France is that you have a lot of local regulations. And I'll give you a simple example. For example, in Paris, the rents are capped. So it means that you cannot choose your rent. So it can be very hard for operating companies because they cannot do their margins correctly, because they are limited in their rents. So this is a big problem, to not be able to have a uniform strategy for a company that wants to implement in France, because it really depends on the place you want to implement. So you won't be able to have just one regular and uniform framework, but you'll have to adapt each time depending on the location of the premises and depending on your project.
Got it. Excellent. Yeah, I think it is, again, always fascinating to see that, okay, in France, there's some co-housing laws, so let's take advantage of those, right? And so I think it's kind of just finding, some kind of path of least resistance to be able to execute co-living, kind of in the way that operators see fit. Great. Thanks for that as kind of the current, kind of co-living legal regulations. Now we'll kind of hop to the more creative, the fun part, I think, is kind of looking at the future of urban legal regulations, right? And so I think that probably everybody on this call and everybody in the world now knows the importance of legal regulations when it comes to living situations or just being in a city, right? I think a lot of the social distancing and lockdowns and everything else. All of this is, decisions being made at a city, a state, or even a country level to, kind of change, hopefully in a positive way, of how people live. And so I think that there's obviously been a lot of focus on it now of we're all working from home or we're working from different places. And so things are going to change, right? So we'd love to just kind of hear from each of the panelists, kind of what changes in urban housing policy do you think that are imminent, right? Like in the next decade, and then kind of maybe as a side question to kind of bring it back to co-living as well. As we've seen a lot of co-living operators that are in the audience today that obviously are curious about legal regulations. What are some upcoming policy changes that you might see kind of coming down the pipeline? And again, I might start off with Russell. I know that you've been working hard with some local, kind of state and federal regulators to actually pass some build to rent and co-living laws in Australia. So we'd love to kind of hear about that process and the future of the legislation there.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like playing the long game, I have to admit. Sometimes you're pulling your hair out, but there is some good news. And we've been quite behind on what I'm going to call build to rent. And I'm going to call the build to rent part the overarching rental typology, and co-living, I suppose, is a specific section within, it's got its own rental market. And build to rent is kind of a term that Australia has stolen from our English counterparts. And a good friend of mine, Paul Winstanley, who's sort of departed the shores of England and come to this side of the world. I actually asked him, I said, what was the #1 catalyst for change in the UK market that sort of helped the build to rent market take off? And he actually said the #1 thing was going back to first principles, and it was actually just simply defining what is build to rent. Because you had to actually go back to all the stakeholders and actually help them understand it. And even though no one liked the words build to rent, it made it very, very hard for people to not understand that term. And so I sort of took that on board and started with the process of saying, all right, well, that's what we need to do. We need to go and define what build to rent is. And then second, let's get a definition for what co-living is and what it can be. And so happy to announce that's about to happen. So build to rent's actually been defined, and that came out of what we called a housing diversity planning policy that got released in about September last year. But they delayed the co-living part. And what made it really hard was we said, right, we've got this definition for build to rent, but hang on, co-living's a form of build to rent and you haven't defined it. So we're actually with the Department of Planning just yesterday in an industry work group, and they're working closely with a number of different stakeholders, and sort of we're one of those, and they're very, very close to coming up with a definition for co-living. And so that's actually really good news. Off the back of that, they'll then actually have some planning provisions, and those provisions will actually set out, well, what actually, off that definition, what can you actually do within that? And I think at the moment, they're probably still constraining that just a little bit, but we're heading in the right direction. Off the back of that, we've got our treasurer for the state that I'm in of New South Wales, and he's actually just recently announced some tax incentives. So those tax constraints that I mentioned before, they're now starting to loosen them up to sort of level the playing field just a little bit. And so we're very, very close to it, probably for the first time in our history, actually having both planning legislation and taxation legislation actually aligning. And that's very uncommon in politics, of actually getting different departments to actually align. So quite excited. We're not quite there, but we're very, very close.
Yeah, that's obviously excellent news. And yeah, again, Russell, great job, kind of being one of the folks to really push that forward in Australia. I think we do need a lot more, kind of movers and shakers out there to actually get these things defined and work with local government officials to actually get these, kind of laws across the line. Laetitia, we can head over to France. Would love to kind of hear, kind of your thoughts as far as, kind of future of urban regulations over there.
Actually, in France, we are moving forward to have a lot of changes in the urban planning. A law passed a few years ago, and now a lot of local municipalities are changing and redefining the destinations, the users of the premises, but it takes long time to do so. So it will be easier to know whether co-living, for example, can be classified as a residential activity or can be classified in a commercial activity. So it's going to be better in certain countries, but also we need to be more clear about the definition of co-living, as Russell said before, because what we see now is that some of the operators of co-living, some have a lot of services, which is for me, I think, part of the co-living activity. But a lot of people are using the co-living name like to market the product, but actually they are doing only co-housing, but not co-living. They are just sharing apartments, but there are no services, and so I think that it's important to have like some regulations on what is co-living, what is the definition of co-living, and to see how we can regulate it and have like a uniform framework.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, completely agree. It's interesting kind of thinking of the co-living definition, from an operator perspective or a business perspective, or just what I think personally. But I think almost even more importantly is we need a legal definition, right? As far as this is what co-living is. Here's how it's different than other living typologies, and kind of here's how we should treat it different from a legal perspective. So thanks for that, Laetitia. Jonathan, yes, would love to kind of hear your perspective on the kind of future of legal regulations when it pertains to co-living.
So in the UK, change is, it sounds very much like Australia and France. Change is coming, albeit slowly. So I think there's an understanding that the planning system is far too far behind where development need and investment is in the UK at the moment, and in many European cities. But there's a new planning white paper at the moment, which is sort of a government proposal in the UK to really shake up the planning system and make it fit for purpose and really forward focused. And so the early stages look to be really positive for the development of housing, but as with everything, there are so many stages to go through until this thing becomes the norm and becomes the legislation in the UK. That it will take some time to come into play. The UK government at the moment, their mantra is build, build, build. But unlike Australia and France, are only a small little island with only so much room. So we'll see how much building actually goes ahead. As I said, there's a substantial amount of sort of new or additional information that's needed to be published until the proposals can be really assessed. So they haven't gone into detail of things like room sizes or extent of shared facilities and things like that for shared or residential rental schemes. There is a recognition that the planning system has a crucial role to play in sort of creating the future places to live and work. My personal view is that in the initial stages, they've missed a real opportunity to recognise the potential of co-living and the wider multifamily or build to rent opportunity in the UK. That they haven't really addressed it directly. It addresses, as Russell said, is often the issue in Australia, the build to sell market more than the build to rent or the rental market as a whole. But really interestingly, and it's almost been forgotten now, but in London, there is a draft policy in place. Again, only draft, we're getting there slowly, but there is a draft policy which actually looks to address co-living. I think that will be influential for planning in other large cities in the UK as well. But it's called, has the very glamorous name of New London Plan Policy H18. And it really focuses on what they call large scale purpose built shared living. So it is larger co-living schemes, and the sort of regulation that they've set out in short, which is helpful and is pushing us in the right direction, is that this legislation is for 50 plus units, so it is larger schemes. 3 months will be the minimum tenancy, so they're moving away from that collective hotel model. They're looking to regulate for tax reasons and also for planning reasons into the more residential territory, and touching on affordability, which Russell also spoken about as being crucial. What they've said is they don't expect any part of the development itself to be any more affordable than any other aspect. What they're not looking to do is have sort of different tiers of living within the same development, as you might get in other sort of build to rent schemes. But what developers will have to do is make a contribution, likely a rather large contribution, for the development of off-site affordable housing. So the contributions from the developer to get the co-living permission will then go to providing affordable housing elsewhere. So the change is coming. It's getting there slowly, but there is a recognition that a shake-up of the whole system was needed, and that co-living or sort of large-scale shared living is part of the solution, which is exciting. It's that part of the policy is London-based at the moment, but hopefully influences other large cities and other areas in the UK as well.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Jonathan. And yeah, really all of our panelists. It's always exciting to hear that change is coming, I think, especially for a innovative new living model such as co-living. Yeah, so we can just do our last question here. And I know there's some questions coming in from the audience that we'll hopefully get a chance to address here in a minute. I can just do one last fun one, I think, is kind of looking at co-living's wish list, right? So if you kind of put yourselves in the shoes of a co-living operator in your respective country or really anywhere across the world, and you said, there's one kind of legal regulation that I would like passed. Sometimes folks talk about new zoning laws, whether there's the removal of or changing of density restrictions, there's changing parking requirements. There's a lot of different kind of levers you can pull to make co-living more attractive. But would love to just kind of hear from each of the panelists if there was one thing that you could change, one thing on your wish list for a co-living operator, what would it be? And maybe Laetitia, we can start off with you this time.
Obviously, it would be the rent capping, which is really the worst regulation. Because it is effective in Paris and in Lille, and so for the operators, it really is not good for the margins, and so I would say definitively the rent capping in France.
Got it. Thanks, Jonathan. We'll head over to you.
I'd have something at a macro level and a micro level as well. So the macro would be just to have that framework by which decision makers are empowered to consent co-living schemes or shared living schemes. And so, and that would be for the similar reasons that Laetitia says that rent control causes an issue. If we want co-living to become not institutionalized, but institutionally accepted, obviously the investment and the investor side of things needs to be taken care of. So to Laetitia's point, where they don't want rent controls because that can really put a fork in financial models and making these things stack up, as Russell said earlier, the scheme has to stack up or no one's going to build it. And so the key in the planning, the sort of my macro planning idea is also that it's not too restrictive of a consent. So you don't get a consent for a co-living space, which is this many rooms and this size, and really limits the use of that building in the future. Whereas what you could have is a permission which is for a shared living scheme of so many units, sort of as approved by the planning commission. So the detail there'll be the detail piece, but there's actually getting this thing consented and off the ground, because in the investment community there's still a bit of nervousness around co-living and whether it's an institutional product. And so you're getting to the stage now where private equity money has come in. You're now having larger institutional investors looking at it. People like Naveen are taking an interest in co-living, and then you'll reach sort of pension fund level after that, where it's a really safe and secure asset class. And obviously I think everybody on this call would have played a part in that, but it's where you're making something more attractive to an investor. And so it's Laetitia's point about rent controls in across Europe, across the world. If these schemes aren't stacking up financially, they're not going to be built. And also in planning terms, we can't have something, we need structure, but it can't be so specific that it limits the value of of the underlying asset in the future. And just onto the micro point, I think a lot of operators and developers have come up against these issues, and they're not co-living specific, they're development specific, particularly in the UK. And it is the things like minimum room size, and not that there shouldn't be a minimum room size, and looking after the people that live in these units and making sure they've got a nice space. But what it shouldn't be is a one size fits all approach. Same way with parking and things like that, where if a scheme doesn't need parking, that's the reason they're not putting forward parking. Maybe they have a vehicle share scheme, or there's micro scooters or something like that around, which or a bike scheme or a bike share, something which detracts from the need for parking, but it's not an instant no because you haven't provided one parking space per apartment, and so the scheme's going to be turned away. It's looking at things sensibly, and as I said, that's not co-living specific in the UK, that's development specific, and it's really making sure that we don't have this one size fits all approach, and that things are appraised in light of the proposal that's being put forward.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Jonathan. Russell, yeah, would love to hear what's at the top of your co-living wish list.
I'm going to give you more than one. I'm going to whip through this as quick as I can. The first one is parking controls. Housing private vehicles has always been a crazy idea for me. We need to break that government mindset that having more cars and more parking is somehow reducing traffic congestion. I don't get it. I think the second thing is that policymakers need to acknowledge that co-living is a unique form of development. We can't try to use existing development standards and controls, and then so we really need specific rules for co-living. Up to now, it doesn't mean we haven't been able to do co-living, but it's that effectively, like, it's a bit like, oh, if I wanted to build a bus, but the government has actually given me specifications to build an aeroplane. You know, just because they're both forms of mobility doesn't mean that they're the same thing. I think the next one is sort of the mindset of the policymakers and consent authorities. You know, I think that, you know, they have to acknowledge that the policymakers are probably a little bit stuck in a tug of war, that they're trying to balance between innovation and then also increasing quantitative controls that provide developers with certainty. So that's a little bit hard one that they're always sort of grappling with, but we need to accommodate both in some way. I think it's my belief sort of that our design and planning disciplines need to focus a little bit less on the buildings itself, because I think they've forgotten that it's actually about the people that create the facilities and the community. So I think that that's really, really important. And it's interesting, I had a discussion with a legislator, you know, just yesterday, and when I actually told them they need to focus more on that, and they said, well, can you tell me how to actually regulate the people? And I went, well, in there lies the problem. I said, if government is actually trying to regulate the people, we've got a problem. You know, I actually think we need to strip all the laws out, use something like the well rating, you know, do something that's actually going to be of benefit to the customer, rather than, oh, you know, this building is 3 millimeters too wide, or there's one less parking space. Let's do some things that's actually going to provide a better experience for the customers.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you guys so much. I know we did have some questions come in from the audience, but I think we've kind of run against our time here. But obviously, feel free to reach out to these three amazing panelists with any questions that you might have. And thank you to all three of you for being on here and all of the knowledge and insights that you've shared. I'm sure we'll have to get another panel here in the near future to get all the updates on how co-living legal regulations have evolved. And with that, I think we have Guy back over in the summit. We will toss it over to you. Thanks a bunch, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Connor, Laetitia, Jonathan, Russell. It was great having you. It's legal regulations and everything that's going on is a big topic, and also one topic that I think is underrepresented right now in the co-living industry, and one of the biggest challenges. I remember when we were doing interviews with a lot of co-liv members, we were trying to figure out, like, what are the main challenges that they have, and one of the highest challenges was actually, how do I set up my company? How do I apply to regulations, and what regulations are actually in my country? So please reach out to these three amazing individuals and their organizations if you need any legal help and support.